Welcome to this episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. With me is Spencer Pauly. And the King County Council has a $3.96 billion problem that they're dealing with that has to do with affordable housing. And if you live in King County, it's a bit of a problem. Spencer, what's going on?
Sure. So recently, the King County Council was briefed on a housing report that highlighted that $3.96 billion gap you're talking about. Now, that's an annual gap we're talking about to meet the county's affordable housing goals. Now, what is that goal exactly? It is 178,000 units of affordable housing by 2044. Now, currently, we're on track to only reach 1/3 of that. And it's a very complex situation here. And on Monday, the King County Council finally deliberated on that, discussed that report. And there's no solutions at this time. But we found out even more issues in this report, including overcrowding. So that means a lot of families, your households of 4 to 5, are just living in a 2-bedroom apartment rather than a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment. And that's mostly because of a lack of sufficient housing for those larger units.
So just to clarify, when they say affordable housing, they really mean taxpayer subsidized housing. It's not affordable because they built it where the price is affordable. They built it and then they have it subsidized by the county so that the price gets artificially lower.
So actually, a good chunk of funding for this goal comes from these government subsidies like you're mentioning there. I believe it is about 30%, and only 17% of that funding that's been made up to reach that 178,000 unit goal stems from renters paying rent. So a lot of this does rely on your federal dollars, your state dollars, and progressive taxes. I'm talking sales jumpstart payroll tax now. That one, that's also known as the Amazon tax, was supposed to go towards affordable housing, but because of budget deficits on an annual basis, that's being used more towards filling the general fund gap. But I digress. Mostly here, yes, subsidies make up a lot of chunk there for what the county is trying to do. And that's something that was kind of brought up a bit, not directly, but Claudia Balducci, King County Council member and candidate for executive, she said that we need to find a way not just to raise money. We're not going to be able to reach that $3.96 billion gap, right? We're not going to fill that up. Instead, we need to bring costs down and kind of restructure our goal. And hers is try to build 44,000 units of affordable housing within 4 years. So we'll see if that's more feasible, but we're at stage 1 right now again here.
I mean, this begs a lot of questions of, one, why is there a funding gap? Was that a bad estimate on their part? Did they miscalculate? And, what work went into this goal of, 178,000 units by 2044? I mean, where did that number come from, and why did they ever examine the feasibility of that when they set that goal? I mean, these are the questions that have to be asked, because this is not a state, like having a $4 billion funding gap for something at a state level is kind of a big deal, but having that annually for a county, and this is for just one project. This isn't like their operating budget. So
right.
I just wonder how they could have not.
Well, the goal was originally 195,000 units when this goal was first established, and that was in 2019. So a lot has changed since then, right? We had a COVID-19 pandemic, which might have stalled.
Where are these numbers? Yeah, where are these numbers? That's the question asked.
I think I actually don't know, TJ. I would say that they probably looked at calculations of the growing rate, the growing population, the demographics. So we're seeing lower income households and trying to meet that need. No, but once again, this is 2019. So I think that goal is going to just have to be adjusted as it was. And it was from 195,000 to 178,000. And that was mostly because of these new revenues that the county and city installed. But, that's going to have to be adjusted again.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like One, it seems like that's the logical thing to just say, hey, we can't meet this goal. It's not feasible. So let's just lower it and go down to something that's a little bit more modest and not try to. You're not covering a $4 billion, and this is an annual gap. This is not like a long-term gap.
Correct.
In terms of funding.
Yeah.
They're not going to be able to come up with money. And if they try to raise taxes, that's going to just make the area even more unaffordable for as far as housing is concerned. It's going to make it more difficult for people to afford to live here.
Yes, and the report says that, TJ, exactly. It put out 3 different ideas, right? So that would include a whole entire countywide property tax to fill that funding gap, which is not feasible whatsoever because it's much more than Seattle's own housing levy that the voters approved. A sales tax wouldn't work at that level, and also a real estate expense tax measure as well. And I reached out to both candidates for executive, Claudia Balducci and Jeremiah Zahalai. I said, would you consider any of these options? And both said no, absolutely not. They're going to have to look at long-term investments and basically collaborating with the state and also Washington, D.C. So if that's feasible or not, I don't know. But they would take a lot to reach that gap that they set out.
Yeah, it seems like the issue has to be getting. Here's kind of part of the problem is that they're trying to get more affordable housing, and they're talking about lowering costs and stuff like that. But one of the other issues is that things beyond their control can make the regional housing market just completely unaffordable. I mean, that Seattle area and the King County is one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. And that's due to people coming here who have tons of money and are willing and are able to pay $1.6 million for a home that you could get for $250,000 in Kansas City. So, and that used to cost $250,000. So they're trying to make it more affordable. But the problem is that as people come in with money, they are raising the cost of property that they need to buy and use for these housing. So
this is an issue that rises from affluence, right? So we had the tech boom hit Seattle and King County and cities like Bellevue, which has increased in cost of living as well. And also King County Councilmember Reagan Dunn, the one of 2 Republicans on the council, he talked about how already King County, as you said, is one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. And this is, we're have to talk about gas prices, cost of food, increasing cost of utilities, and a continuing number of taxes that we're seeing. So I think at this point, the county's going to have to consider, how do we just reduce costs and make our region more affordable, not just looking at housing costs, because in a private sector for housing, people are not going to lower their cost of rent. It's going to just stay where it is or increase. So how do we just lower that blow elsewise so that households, like I talked about, the families, the larger families, aren't so cost burdened by just having to pay a good chunk of their income towards rent alone.
Right. And the issue is, if you're wealthy enough, you can afford to pay for this stuff. And if you're poor enough, you can get subsidized housing. It's people who are not wealthy enough to afford it and too poor to not qualify for stuff. And that seems to be the issue that really is going to plague it. But it kind of raises the question of whether or not a county government can artificially make things more affordable because somebody else is paying for it, and can that person pay for it? And what that does to really push out the people caught in the middle, where they're not making they don't work in the tech sector, so they're not bringing in all the money, and they can't afford a $1.6 million home. But they also they're doing too well enough to qualify for any of this housing that's going on. And so, if you're really poor, you qualify for a lot of stuff, and you can artificially afford to live in King County. So,
and if you're in between there, you have to work the those. Yeah, I was going to say, TJ, and if you're in between there, you're working 40 plus hours a week, much more, just to kind of, make ends meet. And it is that issue for, I suppose, the middle class. But what even is the middle class at this point? It seems like you're either struggling or you're not. But but yeah, I expect this is a regional issue here. I think especially King County, where, you know, for those that aren't working in the tech sector, making a high wage or high income, but you know, you're not making minimum wage, but minimum wage already is kind of high, one of the highest in the country over here. So
yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the county does. If they change their goals, if they, you know, try to reduce the regulatory costs of building housing. You know, one never knows what will end up happening. But thanks for the update on this, Spencer. Listeners can keep up with this story and others at thecentersquare.com. I'm your host, TJ Martinell. Thank you for listening to this episode of Washington in Focus.